challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:11 p.m. here in Budapest, where I have to say the weather is quite nice, the days are quite long, and basically it's just a matter of enjoying this last month of lengthening days before we reach the summer solstice, and from then on, everything is downhill and into Gloomsville, which is where I normally inhabit. So, on a more cheerful note, thank you everybody who has joined me. Really appreciate it. And there's a few things. Peter Kovac says, "Hello, George. Always nice to see you, Peter." So, thank you. So, a few things I want to discuss before we get on to people's comments and thoughts. First of all, the events in Liverpool that I posted a message on the local board yesterday, and while we really don't know at this stage what exactly transpired yesterday, it's clear that something is very strange went on, and as always, the police and the authorities are lying, and lying shamelessly. So, if you recall, there was this seemingly an attack by a out of control car and hit pedestrians in great abundance during the celebrations yesterday for Liverpool, who have won the Premier League title, and so this was a big town celebration. And what was very odd from the beginning was the eagerness with which the police announced that they had arrested somebody, and he was a 53-year-old white British male. Now, there's something very odd about that because, as we know from many such incidents, it's highly unusual, not to say never, that the police disclose any details about the alleged perpetrator. In fact, hours go by, and indeed days go by, and we really don't know anything. And yet here they were, they rushed this out and said, there's a 53-year-old white British male. Now, just think about this information that's come out. So they revealed the person's age. They've revealed the person's race. They said he's white. They've revealed the person's sex. He's male. And they revealed the person's nationality. He's British. So that's a lot of information that they put out almost immediately. And now the media today, of course, are all congratulating the police. Well, yes, it was very good that they put all this information out. Yes, right. Yeah, they learned their lesson from Southport. They're not going to make the mistakes that they made at Southport. Now, this is every single newspaper, every single media outlet has said that the police have learned a lesson from Southport. Even the New York Times chimed in. So now, what do they mean by that? They mean that somehow, because they didn't disclose the identity of the perpetrator. If you recall, what happened in Southport was a 17-year-old, young man, 17-year-old young man, had stabbed to death three little girls who were in a dance class and severely injured a number of other little girls. And nothing was revealed for hours, and then there was a people online started speculating that this was an illegal immigrant, maybe even from one of the migrant hostels. And then after that, then that triggered some rioting, and then there was the crackdown on not just on the rioters, I mean not just on the people who threw rocks, but there was a crackdown on also on people who had made postings on Facebook and elsewhere. So somehow everywhere, and Keir Starmer, who shamelessly visited Southport and laid some flowers, and he was heckled appropriately when he arrived, and then he didn't say anything. He delivered his flowers, didn't say anything in the face of the heckling, and then someone says, "2-tier justice," says Deadly 0101, "2-tier justice," or "2-tier Keir," as I think Elon Musk referred to him as. So he didn't say, and then he just launched into this whole tirade against far-right thugs, and then there'll be no tolerance for these far-right thugs. We're going to send them into prison, and that in fact did happen. A lot of people were sent to prison, not just the people who, as I say, threw rocks, even though nobody was injured. I mean, so there was the hysteria. Nobody was injured. I mean, they were throwing rocks, which is obviously not a desirable activity, and it's an inherently dangerous activity, but nonetheless nobody was hurt. But the crackdown, and that was what was somewhat sinister about the whole thing, was that the crackdown was on people's social messages. That somehow these people, these social messages, were conveying false information. Now, as it turned out, of course, the culprit in Southport, Manchester, wasn't an illegal migrant, but that doesn't mean that he was somehow a-okay, and everything's fine. Even though the media did want to present it as the culprit was a Welshman. He's one of these Welshmen, like Dylan Thomas or Richard Burton, Owen Glendower, with the lyricism that we associate with the Welsh people. Now it turns out that it was basically a Rwandan migrant. The culprit, I mean, now we can say he is the culprit, not the alleged culprit. He is the culprit. He's now been convicted and sent to prison. He was born in the United Kingdom, but his father came from Rwanda. And the media, in their deceitful way, the only things that they published about him was this picture of this little boy, 8 years old, and looking, very, very cute in a school blazer and everything else. And you think, well, how could this person, look so cute, with little dimples in his cheeks and his little adorable little school blazer, how could he possibly do anything so terrible as murder little girls? It must be, yes, you guessed it, our racist British society that could have perverted this adorable little boy into this monstrous killer. Now, there was a reason, of course, why the police were silent about this, the perpetrator. This had nothing to do with that he was, Muslim, illegal migrant, nothing like that. This person was on the radar. This person had been on the radar for some time. He had an online presence. He had all sorts of psychotic fantasies. He had downloaded an Al Qaeda guidebook, how to be a good Al Qaeda warrior. That's serious commitment there. I wouldn't know where I can download a how-to handbook for Al Qaeda members, and even if I did, I wouldn't do it because I would assume that if I tried to download something like that, I would have automatically come under the scrutiny of the FBI, MI5, Special Branch, and the rest. But he did this. So he had an extensive presence online. The police knew all about him. Obviously, they didn't really want to reveal that, and instead, they made the whole story about the far right thugs. There's a wonderful diversionary maneuver, the type that the media do very well, which is why, instead of talking about this horrific event, these little girls have been murdered. We're not talking about that. We are talking about far right thugs. I don't know how many of these state times Keir Starmer and what's her name, the Home Secretary, Ed Balls' wife. I forget her name now. They talked about the far right thugs. But the fact was that first of all, that he was born in the UK really was neither here nor there, because it still raised the question of why was his father in the UK to begin with? He came from Rwanda. What was the reason for him to be there? So he was a taxi driver. Okay, so what is taxi driving? Is another one of these jobs that nobody in Britain wants to do? I mean, it's amazing how we have to bring in doctors and nurses into the UK because why? Oh well, apparently no one in Britain wants to be a doctor. No one wants to be a nurse. So you have to keep bringing in migrants. So it didn't seem like there was any enormous need to bring in someone from Rwanda just to be a taxi driver. But either way, so he was there, and clearly he had an online presence. He had been known to be psychotic, threatening people, and he had he had this Al Qaeda book that he had downloaded, and he had made downloaded material about ricin and so on. So they wanted to keep all of that quiet, and all of that only came out during the trial. And then they found out, well, hey, well, it's not really this. Instead of this picture of this adorable little boy, this 8-year-old boy, suddenly, hey, he doesn't look so adorable anymore. But anyway, that was the story. The far right thugs exploited what happened in Southport, and now the police have learnt their lesson. Yes, we'll fill in the blanks. We're not going to allow any blanks. Yeah, so the conspiracy theories move in. Now, as I say, this wasn't a conspiracy theory. The fact that he wasn't a illegal migrant in the country, that doesn't mean that he should have been in the country, because clearly Britain hadn't benefited in any way, shape, or form from the fact that his father was in the United Kingdom. He'd come in to be a taxi driver, and he had, as is often the case, the second generation of migrants is going to be a real problem. There's nothing unusual about that. It's something that's already a part of human experience and was easily predictable. But anyway, so the media were praising the police. Now, the question then is this. They reveal this. Why did they reveal this? Why did they put this out when in previous times, we'd always been told that we can't put out any of these details. He was that he's white. We can't put out details of somebody. Well, he's black, or he's an illegal migrant. We can't put them out because it is unfairly prejudicial. And that's what Keir Starmer himself said, because Keir Starmer, who had been head of the Director of Public Prosecutions, he had said, no, we can't put out this kind of information because it is prejudicial. He won't be able to get a fair trial, and he will be acquitted, even though that's nonsensical. You're not going to be acquitted just because they put out stories that this person is black or is an illegal migrant. But okay. But apparently you can put out that he's a 53-year-old Deadly 101 says, I don't want to spoil the story, so I'll stay stumm. Okay, thank you. So there we are. So the 53 is their outcomes. This white British male. But you see, what's kind of interesting about this is that, of course, the Twitter sphere immediately exploded yesterday, as I say, because they all came out with once the police rushed this information out. White British male, whoa, way to go, fantastic, great, white British men, as we always knew that they're all mass murderers. We always knew this. Now, let's keep in mind, we at this stage, certainly yesterday, even though the criminal charges against this person are now attempted murder, but yesterday evening when they put that story out about the white British male, we didn't know. For all we know, the man had a heart attack. It could happen. It's happened before. Somebody, has a heart attack when he's driving, and he just steers his car into the crowd. He may have just, like an idiot, should have known something about what was going on with the traffic, got himself stuck in the middle of the crowd, and he may have panicked and whatever. There are possibilities. Yesterday evening, we simply had no idea what had happened. But they rushed this out, and the Twitter universe exploded with glee about these homicidal white British males. So it's very interesting because either way, the white British males always get it. I mean, they're always the culprit. So in the case of the Rwandan last summer, it was the white British male that were at fault. They were at fault at first in creating this racist society in which an adorable little boy, a Welshman, should have become a Welsh little boy, in other words, should have become the psychotic murderer. Well, it has to be the racist white male. And of course, then the racist white males were to blame for putting out this fake story about an illegal migrant being responsible. Even though, incidentally, all of that was exaggerated. People were not saying at the time that this was an illegal migrant who had done this. That was just made up by the media, made up, of course, by Keir Starmer, who wanted to crack down on the far-right thugs. So now, that was the fault of the white British males, because they were putting out this fake story and giving fuel to anti-Islamic sentiment and racist sentiment. So they were at fault because, as a result, the people were getting very racist and very anti-Islamist. Now the thing is that now they're at fault. So just like whenever there's any kind of an attack, whether in Germany or anywhere else, where some Islamist does this Allahu Akbar and kills some random person, the only issue that matters, the only thing that we need to worry about not the unfortunate dead passerby who got an axe in his head. But the only issue is the Islamophobia, that somehow this will lead to growing Islamophobia, and heaven forbid, it will lead to a rise in the popularity of the horrible political parties that, like the Alternative für Deutschland or the National Rally, or in Britain it used to be the National Front, then it was the British National Party, and now of course it's Nigel Farage's Reform UK. So that's the only real problem. I mean, and just as last year in the case of those little girls in Southport, the only thing that matters was the far right thugs. I mean, it was quickly forgotten, everything that was terrible. So here we have the situation now where we don't really know. We're now we're now more than 24 hours on from what happened, and we don't seem to really know very much about it. What I always love is when the police put out these statements, and they all say the police ask people not to speculate about the motives for this action. And I always wonder, where does the police get off telling anybody not to say something, not to think something, not to speculate? None of your goddamn business, what I speculate about. I mean, I will speculate if I want to. I may be wrong in my speculation, but I will speculate. Don't speculate. Just move right along. It really is a classic of move along. Nothing to see here. So that's nothing to see here. Don't speculate. But we still have not been told anything at all. Now, yesterday, when I posted that BBC story, what I found striking about that story was that the BBC seemed to distinguish between the possible culprit and the man who was arrested. So they said, yeah, this 53-year-old white British male who had been arrested, but it's not clear whether that's the driver of the car. That and the BBC, that was a perfectly legitimate question, because they put out the story about a man being arrested, but there was the question is, well, is this the person who drove the car? And so that wasn't clear. Now, subsequently, the police had a news conference, and they did say that this 53-year-old white British male, and let's say it again, a 53-year-old white British male, just in case we didn't hear it the first time or the second time, the 53-year-old white British male who was behind the car, and the one he's been arrested, and he's believed to be the driver. Well, that obviously that does raise an awful lot of questions. We don't know. We'll have to wait for some information. I would venture that we have not been told, 1/10 of the real story here. There are a lot of other things that are going on here, and we haven't been told. 9/10 of the real story. I don't want to speculate because I can't, because I think it's just simply I don't know enough. But it's very interesting. I mean, if you just, even when you look at the footage, Um, the footage said, "Oh, here's the 53-year-old male who is believed to be the suspect," and we see the police arresting. Seemingly, they were arresting or restraining somebody who did indeed look 53 and a white British male. I mean, he looked like a 53-year-old. Though that didn't look like the driver um, from the footage that I saw. Um, that driver didn't look 53, and you know he certainly looked male, but whether he was white or British, I was not immediately um, uh, like who it was. Um, so so anyway, obviously we're going to learn a little more. But what we do know, and why I bring up the whole thing about uh, the 53-year-old white British male, is that it wouldn't have happened. This thing about, oh, the police, they got ahead of the story. They didn't want to leave any speculation. If it had been, um, a Muslim, a refugee from Afghanistan, or anything like that, they would not have told us. They would not have said, "Oh, this the person, the alleged perpetrator was perhaps an illegal resident in this country. He had arrived on a boat just a couple of weeks ago, or he had overstayed his visa, or there was a deportation proceeding that had already been completed some time ago, and he just hadn't been deported." They would not have revealed that information. That's why they wouldn't have done it. They rushed this information out precisely because they could say he's a 53-year-old white British male. Um, that's the only reason they revealed it. Anything else, they would not have done it. But now they're enjoying all this kudos because the media are absolutely delighted that the alleged perpetrator is a 53-year-old white British male. They can just keep repeating it because it's the perfect perpetrator. Yeah, we always thought that white males are the worst. And that, Hollywood had told us, I don't know how many movies Hollywood has made with horrible, terrible, evil, psychotic white males. And that's it. It's confirmed all of our prejudices. And we've, this is the perfect story. So anyone who says, "Oh well, now that they've done this, now that they rushed this information out, they can no longer, next time anything like this happens, they can no longer sit on it for hours and hours, if not days. They can't sit on it now because they've created this precedent whereby they can release the information." And no, they've created no precedent. What happened on Monday is sui generis, at least as far as we know, because when it happens next time, and it's not a white British male, then you can be sure that they will absolutely keep quiet about it. They will not disclose any information because they know that that their responsibility is not to have anyone have negative thoughts about migrants or anything else. Anyway, so that's my thoughts on that. Um, the other thing I wanted to get onto is the situation with Ukraine and Russia. So we had the attack the drone attack. Of course, everyone only focused on the drone attack on that Russia had launched against Ukraine, but nobody had paid very much attention to the event that had led to that. And that was that Ukraine had launched a major drone attack on Russia. More seriously, this was a drone attack on on President Putin. He had flown in by helicopter to Kursk, and this his first visit to Kursk um, since the since I'll call it the liberation, though it's not hasn't been completely liberated. But okay, I'll just leave it as liberation. So it's his first visit there, and though this was this attack, a major drone attack on Putin. Now, that of course does raise all sorts of questions because that's quite a serious matter. Was this an attempt to assassinate the Russian president? This seems to have aroused little interest. There's been little speculation because and even though we know that this is the kind of thing the Ukrainians have done time and time again. So, but this didn't do it. And what's kind of troubling about all of this is that we're having more and more of these belligerent talk from the Europeans. We've had Chancellor Merz now speaking about removing the restrictions on the use of missiles, removing restrictions on long distance missiles use by Ukraine inside Russian territory. And we don't yet know that, and this is where the speculation is, as to whether Merz intends to go through with his promise of delivering the German Taurus missiles to Ukraine. Remember, our friend Sergeant Schultz had balked at that. He said he couldn't bring himself to do that because these Taurus missiles cannot be used and they cannot be targeted by Ukrainians. The only ones who could do it would be the Germans. So if the Taurus missiles were transferred to Ukraine, then they would only be usable if the Germans themselves used it. And Sergeant Schultz naturally thought, I don't think it's a good idea. Germany essentially targeting Russian territory. But Merz seems to have abandoned that restraint. Now, to be fair, Merz hasn't explicitly stated that he intends to transfer the Taurus missiles. He had been promising to do so, but nonetheless, he hasn't explicitly said, I will do this. But he has said no more restraints on missile use, on German missile use. Well, that kind of talk, along with all the general threats against Russia, has gone together with Trump sending out this somewhat strange truth earlier today. Let me just read out what Trump said, if I can bring it up. And here is what he said today. What Vladimir Putin doesn't realize is that if it weren't for me, lots of really bad things would have already happened to Russia. And I mean really bad. He's playing with fire. So we'll look at that and let's read that again. What Vladimir Putin doesn't realize is that if it weren't for me, lots of really bad things would have already happened to Russia. And I mean really bad. He's playing with fire. So that's an extraordinary threat to make. As I say, this threat was made 2 days after what may have been an assassination attempt against Putin. And let's also keep in mind that the drones. I mean, of course, while Biden transferred these ATACMS missiles to Ukraine and had signed off on Ukraine's use of the ATACMS missiles, even though, and he knew, and the Russians knew, that the ATACMS cannot be used without American signals intelligence, American satellite intelligence, American satellite guidance. They cannot be done. Ukraine cannot do it. They can only attack Russian territory if if the Americans are providing the key targeting information. So, but that applied, of course, to the ATACMS, but that also applies to the drones. Just because they're not ATACMS, the drones also, the Ukrainians cannot use the drones without targeting information, satellite targeting information from the Americans or the British or the Germans or whatever. So this attack on this alleged attack on Putin's helicopter would have had to make use of targeting information, satellite targeting information. Now, was it the Americans who provided it? Was it the British, the French, the Germans? I don't know. But nonetheless, it's a serious escalation. Now, I played yesterday that news conference that Trump gave on Sunday in New Jersey, where he was going on about Trump's gone off his rocker and so on, and then somebody, a reporter, said to him, "Well, you know, that attack may have been a response to what the Russians perceived to have been an assassination attempt." And Trump seemed to be caught flat-footed. He wasn't expecting that question, and he said, "Well, if that's so, you know, maybe the Russian response is understandable." So when he said that, he backed away effectively from what he had just been saying. He said, "Oh, Putin's gone off his head." And then the reporter says, "Well, you know, that's what the Russians are saying. This is a response to what they perceive to be a possible assassination attempt." And Putin said, "Well, maybe," Trump said, "Well, maybe then that's understandable." So you've now gone back on your thing. Then the Russians are not. Putin hasn't gone insane. They're behaving quite reasonably. Somebody says, "I don't believe Trump knew." I agree with you. I think his response would suggest he didn't know anything about this. And then you're saying the deep state, and I agree with you there as well. I think there are actors within the US government, there are actors within NATO, there are actors within Germany, there are especially in the UK and in France who want to provoke some kind of a serious crisis, whatever form. So they want to do this, and they know an assassination of Putin would if you want a serious crisis, and then you've got a serious crisis. And I think that there are people who want to do this. But then, this truth by Trump would suggest that he seems to become aware of it now, and says, if it weren't for me, lots of really bad things would already have happened to Russia. In other words, there are actors, whether within the US government, there are actors within NATO, within the UK government, whatever. If it hadn't been for me, these actors would have done really bad things. And then he says, I mean really bad. So, they like, the really question, like, what do you mean really bad? What kind of really bad things? So it seems like from yesterday, or yeah, no, from Sunday to today, Tuesday, he seems to have become quite cognizant that there are actors who who have bad intent towards Russia. He says he's playing with fire. In other words, there are a lot of bad things could happen to Russia, and hey, I might not even be able to do much about it. It's it's quite a remarkable statement. Lots of really bad things would already have happened to Russia, and I mean really bad. He's playing with fire. So that's, as I say, that's 2 days after an attempted assassination, and now he's sort of saying, yeah, I mean, something, bad things could happen. And then remember, this was the truth that he sent out. Oh no, that's the wrong one. I was going to say the the truth that he sent out on Sunday after the news conference. He said, I've always had a very good relationship with Vladimir Putin, but something has happened to him. He has gone absolutely crazy. He is needlessly killing a lot of people, and I'm not just talking about soldiers. Missiles and drones are being shot into cities in Ukraine for no reason whatsoever. I've always said that he wants all of Ukraine, not just a piece of it, and maybe that's proving to be right. But if he does, it will lead to the downfall of Russia. So again, now a threat here. Um, but you have to say, Trump seems very strangely ill-informed about Russia, because he's saying, again, he says it's gone absolutely crazy. Which, I mean, even that journalist who asked him this question about this, that the Russians are saying there was an assassination attempt, he seemed uninformed about it. He didn't know about it. But the journalist knew, hey, well, that's what the Russians are saying. There was an assassination attempt. And yet Trump seemed surprised by this. And then he says he's needlessly killing a lot of people. And I'm not just talking about soldiers. Again, that's wrong. I mean, there are civilian casualties, but nonetheless, Russia is primarily targeting legitimate military targets. I mean, they're civilians, that's, you got the collateral damage, but it's not targeting civilians. And then he says missiles and drones are being shot into cities for no reason whatsoever. Again, they're targeting, so to say for no reason whatsoever is not correct. And then he says, I've always said that he wants all of Ukraine, not just a piece of it, and maybe that's proving to be right. But if he does, it will lead to the downfall of Russia. This is, I guess he's saying that, well, if he tries to take all of Ukraine, then presumably the United States, NATO are going to go and crush Russia. I mean, he said things like that before. I mean, there's a lot of talk there, but that's still of a piece. He used to threaten Russia like that during his first term as well. And then he comes on. Likewise, President Zelensky is doing his country no favors by talking the way he does. everything out of his mouth causes problems. I don't like it, and it better stop. This is a war that could never have started if I were president. This is Zelensky's, Putin's, and Biden's war, not Trump's. I'm only helping to put out the big and ugly fires that have been started through gross incompetence and hatred. So the point that I want to make here is that there are clearly, and Trump is suggesting there are clearly forces within the US government, within NATO, that do want to do really bad things. They see this as an opportunity to push Trump towards war. I saw on CNN yesterday Admiral James Stavridis, one of these really awful, belligerent NATO types, been around forever. And he seemed to be quite gleeful and seemed to be saying, the situation for us warmongers, has become quite nice. We're in a lot better position than we were back in February when Trump raked Zelensky over the coals in the Oval Office. That was a low point. And remember, after that Oval Office meeting, Trump did cut off arms flows and intelligence to Ukraine. And then he went back on it. So now all these Stavridis types think that they can push Trump into their warlike plans. I'm not saying that they will succeed in doing so, but that's their goal. And that's why we have to be very, very careful now, at this very moment, about these possible provocative acts, because it's clear what the plan is. What the plan is to get Trump to put his weight behind this war against Russia. In other words, which would always been afraid it might happen, that he will actually escalate Biden's war. Far from walking away from Biden's war, he will escalate. I mean, before January the 20th, that's what I thought might happen. But then I was kind of, pleasantly surprised that Trump did seem to want to chart a different course, and I still think he does. And I still think there's a possibility that he could chart a different course, but he has to be made aware of these plans, and it seems like he knows what's going on, and yet he doesn't seem to have the ability to resist. He says, well, if it weren't for me, really bad things would have happened to Russia. In other words, within his administration, within his own armed forces, within his own intelligence services, within his own NATO apparat, there are forces who want to do really bad things in Russia and suck America into a catastrophic war. So let's just look at what happened, this thing about the Putin's helicopter. So this is a story from the Telegraph of London. It says Putin's helicopter fended off drone attack. And then it says Putin's helicopter was forced to shoot down drones while he was aboard. Moscow officials said on Sunday the Russian president's aircraft was involved in an air defense battle after an unprecedented Ukrainian drone assault. Major General Yuri Dashkin, an air defense commander, told state television. The incident was said to have happened last week when the Russian leader was on a tour of Kursk, part of which Ukraine previously occupied. And then, during the period when the president was working in the Kursk region, the enemy launched an unprecedented attack with unmanned aerial vehicles, Major General Dashkin said in an interview with Russia 24 television. He added, we simultaneously conducted an air defense battle and ensured the safety of the presidential helicopter's flight in the air. And then Russian forces destroyed several Ukrainian drones during the operation. Major General Dashkin claimed the task was accomplished. He said the attack of the enemy drones was repelled and then all air targets were hit. And then, so all right, so that's, let me get before that. So now, what's striking about these kinds of stories is, well, Ukraine does this. Russia never does this. I think during the my last live stream, um, somebody I think asked, "Well, how come Zelensky is able to travel here and there, and nobody's stops him? He's going to travel to South Africa, and he's going to travel, that travels freely to the United States. Nobody ever stops him." And I gave an answer saying, "Well, look, Putin, for some mysterious reason, which we still haven't quite figured out, gave his word to then Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett that he will not kill Zelensky." It was very strange why Putin would want to make that kind of a commitment, and there's no necessity for him to make that commitment, but there it is. He made the commitment, and no attempt, as far as I can see, no attempt has been made to assassinate um, Zelensky. Now, there have been a number of assassinations, quite a few assassinations inside Russia, perpetrated by Zelensky, and there have been attacks on the Kremlin, drone attacks on the Kremlin, which could be said to be attempted assassinations of Putin. And now we have this. Um, so this and one should say there's also a story in Build, and I don't particularly. I was toying with the idea of looking into this article by Bild, because Bild is this German news magazine published by Axel Springer, and I've never really trusted anything Axel Springer um, says or does. Well, he's dead now, but his publishing house. Um, and so, they're saying that there was an attempt, an assassination attempt on Putin. So, Ukraine evidently, without any compunction at all, conducts these attempted assassinations. And that's a serious business, because if you attempt to assassinate a Russian president, that's going to have global implications. You're not going to be able to get out of a Russian NATO war in that case, because that's a serious business. Russia would not limit itself in response. It would not limit itself to attacking Ukrainian territory, as it has done up until now. It has not attacked any territory outside of Ukraine. So that's a serious thing. And now you think, well, did somebody sign off on it? Did somebody tell Ukraine that no problem, you just go right ahead and try to assassinate Putin? So we'll have to see, and therefore that's why this truth sent out by Trump is rather troubling. Now, I've tried to be as sympathetic as possible to Trump. I don't go along with the thesis that, oh, it's just Biden's policy and whatever. Yeah, it's the same thing as Biden. There's no change. I mean, there's obviously been a change. He's abandoned. Let me just see. Let's just say this is a message I have to address. Okay. Let me just. Um, yeah. So the uh, this you know, it's clearly that these are serious um, situations, and they could be obviously um, lead to serious crises, and the another serious situation, as I say, which is developing, is what's going on with Chancellor Schmerz. And he says Germany's Merz backs Ukraine's long range missile strikes on Russia. And it says Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz has backed Ukrainian military strikes deep into Russian territory following his earlier commitment to supply Kiev with German long range missiles. Germany, Britain, France, and the US have removed all range restrictions for weapons delivered to Ukraine, Merz said on Monday. Paris, London, and Washington have supplied long range missiles to Kiev and have already allowed strikes in Russian territory. But Merz's stance contrasts with that of his Social Democratic predecessor, Olaf Scholz, whom he replaced this month. The former chancellor repeatedly rejected pleas from Kiev and its um, uh, and to supply the Ukrainian armed forces with German Taurus missiles, which have intelligent warhead systems that can inflict huge damage to structures such as bridges and bunkers. While Merz has decided to stop disclosing weapons deliveries since taking office, a stance in line with the strategic ambiguity approach of French President Emmanuel Macron, he had previously said he favored deliveries of Taurus missiles to Kiev if they were coordinated with European allies. Um, and then there is no longer any range restriction on weapons delivered to Ukraine, neither by the British, nor by the French, nor by us, nor by the Americans. Merz said at a conference in Berlin. He added, this means that Ukraine can now defend itself, for example, by attacking military positions in Russia. It couldn't do that until some time ago. It did do that with very few exceptions. Ukraine can do that now. In jargon, we call this long range fire. And that's it. So, this is again is a kind of a troubling development. We know this is the plan, the plan of the Europeans to try to create a situation that Trump is absolutely committed to and that he's not going to be able to worm himself out of. That they're going to create this crisis, and because of NATO and all your obligations, Article 5 and so on, that United States will be on the hook. Now, as I was saying earlier, um, I try to be sympathetic to Trump because I say, look, he is basically he's changed the policy. He's not pursuing the Biden policy. He does want to end this war. He does see it as a terrible drain on U.S. resources. It doesn't serve U.S. interests at all. He'd like to develop a relationship with Russia, whether it's economic, strategic, whatever. That he obviously wants to go there. Um, and Ukraine is just an endless drain of resources without a clear path to victory. And that's what was that's what you always need to have. At least what's the plan for victory. And if you can't put forward a plan for victory, then think, well, let's cut this off. And so he's abandoned the whole Ukraine in NATO. He's abandoned the whole idea of Ukraine returning to its pre-2014 borders. So he's made a lot of changes since Biden. So therefore, the people who say it's the same as Biden, these Michael Tracy types, I mean, it's just nonsense. He's made a lot of changes. He's not Bush. He's not Cheney. This isn't the continuation of the Bush-Cheney administration. Nonetheless, he hasn't succeeded in distancing himself from Ukraine and distancing himself from the European branch of NATO. And as long as he hasn't done it, he is always in danger of being sucked into this war. That's it. That's his problem. As Peter and I were saying yesterday in the live stream, when it comes to foreign policy, Trump isn't setting the agenda. He should be setting the agenda. He should be basically trying to outline some settlement, peace settlement, and then essentially once he's got some kind of an agreement with Russia to make clear to Ukraine that you have to settle for this. There's no other option. So he's what he's doing is the opposite of what Nixon was doing. Nixon was setting the framework for a final settlement in Vietnam. It took him some time, but he was settling on what would be kind of the final agreement. But it took time, and he knew that at some point he is going to have to lean heavily on America's client in Saigon and said, you have to accept it. You don't have any options. That's what Trump should be now doing. So I don't think there's any need for him to cut off Ukraine, just from one day to the next. That's it. You've gone. We're not giving you anything. I know a lot of people say this is the alt media. That's not going to happen. That was ridiculous to expect Trump to do that. He's not going to do that. Because if he did do that, he would immediately come under ferocious attack from within his own party, from within his government, from the bureaucracy, from the military, from the intelligence, from NATO, from all these European allies. He's going to have to back down. He would have to back down almost immediately. And then once he's backed down, he looks foolish, weak and foolish. So that isn't going to happen. But at some point, he's going to have to do that. At some point, he's going to have to say that to Ukraine that's it. So, but the point is, he's not setting the agenda. And so when it comes to domestic affairs, Trump is setting the agenda. Trump is always ahead of everyone else. Whether it's going after the universities, going after Harvard, going after the immigrants, going after the law firms, whether it's on tariffs, or the MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, going after the big pharma. On front after front, Trump is setting the agenda. He's, and everybody is reacting to him. I mean, they're reacting to him by rushing to court to try to stop him, but they are reacting. He's setting the agenda, and everyone's trying to react to him. When it comes to foreign policy, he's the one who's reacting. Somebody else is setting an agenda, and he's forced to react. He says one thing one day, then he says the opposite the next. There's not articulating a clear vision of where he wants to go. And I think that's why I think this is a moment of grave danger. I think the assassination attempt, which I think it was, and I think someone, whether in the U.S. deep state or whether in the British, the Germans, or wherever, were involved in this. Somebody knew. Somebody helped Ukraine to target Putin's helicopters. Somebody did this. I don't think it was Trump, because I think Trump would know that this is a disastrous, reckless thing to do. So I think he didn't do it. But it is a moment of great danger. Anyway, let's take a look at our locals page and see what our friends, our subscribers who want to make sure that the dogs are in a good frame of mind, because when the tip jar isn't moving in the right direction, the dogs, they make life very difficult, and it's always me that they blame. So I really appreciate everybody who uh, joins our community, our locals community. I particularly appreciate everybody who contributes to the tip jar. You don't get too many thank yous from the dogs; that's not in their nature. But you do get thank yous from me. So thank you everybody who's contributed. Um, so Shapronka says the struggle in BBC editorial between the truth tellers and Hasbarists would be comical if it weren't so tragic. Yesterday on Radio 4's Late Night News, we heard a moving tribute to Ahmed Al Dali, a member of the Gaza Sunbirds paracycling team who was killed last week. And today we are back to repeated insinuations about Hamas stealing food aid, forever proud of unbiased reporting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's that's a very good point. I think they do a kind of pro forma reporting. I mean, they have to acknowledge they have to acknowledge the terrible events in Gaza. It has been going on now 19 months. They have to acknowledge these the horrors, the women, the children, the killing, the destruction, everything. They have to acknowledge that, but it's a kind of pro forma that you do it um, because otherwise people are going to complain. I mean, you just can't. There isn't an unremitting um, uh, pro Israel um, bloc in Britain the way there is in the United States. So in the United States, you absolutely can just simply go day after day about Israel, the perpetual victim, Israel, a victim of a new Holocaust, anti-Semitism, always, everywhere, anti-Semitism rears its ugly head. You can get away with that um, in the United States. You can't get away with it in the UK. So the official organs, such as the BBC, you know, they, they have to make at least some acknowledgement about what has happened in Gaza. They have to make some. Yeah, it's very hard to get food into Gaza. Oh, it's very hard to get medical aid into Gaza. Oh, look, these aid workers were killed. Who? This hospital was destroyed. So they have to do it, and then they go back to telling horrific stories about Hamas. Hamas is stealing food, and everything is Hamas's fault. Um, so yeah, what the way you describe the BBC, that's exactly what you get in the Guardian. It's what you get in the Independent. Not really in the Times and the Telegraph. They're pretty much solidly in Israel's corner. They very rarely get anything, anytime, any kind of negative coverage about Israel. But yeah, but the sort of leftish or left of center media, as in the Guardian or the Independent, yeah, they will have to make a due acknowledgement. Well, hey, there's some bad things going on in Gaza. So anyway, thank you, Shapronko. Um, and Aristotle 1, thank you very much for your contribution. Aristotle 1 says, how strong is the legal case that Russia intervened to enforce the UN agreed Minsk Accords? Well, the legal case may not be particularly strong, or at least it's as strong as the United States' case to invade Iraq, because the United States did attempt to claim that in trying to address the weapons of mass destruction issue in Iraq, the United States claimed that Saddam Hussein has a weapons of mass destruction program, is an imminent threat to the neighborhood, the world, whatever, is that the United States was attempting to enforce existing UN Security Council resolutions. And there were UN Security Council resolutions prohibiting Iraq from developing weapons of mass destruction, demanding that there be regular inspections of Iraq. And the inspections in the case of Iraq had stopped, but they had stopped because the United States had insisted that they stop. That was prior to Clinton's attack on Iraq in 1998. Clinton launched this bombing attack, a ridiculous pretext. And at that moment, prior, in launching the attack, before that, they had to withdraw the UN inspectors. So all the UN inspectors were withdrawn from Iraq in December 1998, and they never came back. But the United States then used that to. Sorry, just these are important messages. Okay, yeah. So they had to do that, and their case. But the reason why the United States didn't make a very strong case, or not plausible case, is that they would still have had to get a new UN Security Council resolution in order to authorize going in, because there was nothing in the original UN Security Council resolution on weapons of mass destruction authorizing anyone to take military action unilaterally. I mean, as in all UN Security Council resolutions, the last paragraph is always, well, the Security Council will remain apprised of the matter. In other words, we will make a determination. But there's no provision there that anyone can take unilateral action and can take it upon himself to enforce a Security Council resolution. So the same thing would apply in Russia's case. You're absolutely right. The Minsk agreement was codified in the UN Security Council resolution. And of course, Minsk was not observed. And Russia would then, could in theory, then say, well, this UN Security Council resolution insists that the Minsk Accords be observed. The Minsk Accords have not been observed, and we are going in to enforce the UN Security Council resolution. But I think you would legally you would run into the same problem, which is you can't. There's no provision within that resolution that you can take unilateral action. The UN Security Council could. The UN Security Council could, after due deliberation, declare that that the Minsk Accords have not been observed, and that the UN Security Council will go in and ensure that it will hence will be enforced. But that wouldn't happen. In much the same way, the Bush administration did try to get the UN Security Council to step in and to insist on military action against Iraq. I mean, Bush did go there and try to make that case, but there was no way the UN Security Council was going to agree, because France, Russia, and China would three of the 5 permanent members were ready to veto any such resolution. So essentially, the Bush gave up. If Russia were to try to do that, the same thing would happen. You would get the UK, the US, and France, 3 of them, they would veto a resolution demanding enforcement action. I mean, in principle, Russia could make that case, and make the case that the Americans did on Iraq and the Americans did on Yugoslavia. I mean, they said, well, we didn't get a UN Security Council resolution authorizing action, but the reason we didn't was that there were these awful, horrible, mean, nasty, selfish, great powers who only think about themselves and who were going to veto any attempt to enforce a humanitarian resolution. That's what the United States claimed, justifying their action against Yugoslavia in 1999, and then of course the invasion of Iraq in 2003. We couldn't get it through because it would be vetoed, so we had to act unilaterally. So Russia could say exactly the same thing. Well, we couldn't. We tried to get this enforced. We wanted the UN Security Council to do it, but we were going to be vetoed. There was no way we were going to be. Now, Russia made no attempt to. I mean, they clearly did make an attempt innumerable times to raise the matter of the Minsk Accords at the Security Council, but I don't think they ever made an attempt to ask the Security Council to authorize a military campaign to get this Minsk enforced. Or maybe they should have done. I mean, you have to give George W. Bush a certain credit. He actually did make the attempt to get the UN Security Council to support his action. Again, Bill Clinton didn't do that in Yugoslavia. He made no attempt to go before the Security Council, and Russia didn't in this case. So maybe if Russia had done that, and of course it would have been vetoed, and then could have said, "Well, we tried, but we were vetoed." So there's the problem. I mean, but Russia has a legal case there. That is a legal case about the Minsk. Because Minsk was embodied within these Security Council resolutions. But Russia also has the case of the responsibility to protect. It has been acknowledged in international law, responsibility to protect, even though it hasn't been codified in international law. It's being used in a fairly one-sided and unilateral, implausible ways, but it has been used. And the Americans and the another one of these coalitions of the willing did use the responsibility to protect doctrine at the time of the bombing of Libya in 2011. That was the responsibility to protect, and so Russia could say we had the responsibility to protect our co-nationals who were being massacred and attacked and so on. And we had to do it. We had a responsibility to protect ethnic Russians, and then they could present and say, well, other countries have done this. India did this to protect the East Bengalis in 1971. They did it in order to protect their nationals. The West Bengalis were living in India. The East Bengalis were part of Pakistan. Turkey did it in 1974 to protect the Turkish Cypriots. And the Vietnamese did it when they invaded Cambodia to bring the rule of the Khmer Rouge to an end. So they can say, well, that that was a humanitarian. I mean, there was no responsibility to protect doctrine at the time, but nonetheless, there were unilateral actions, ostensibly to pursue a humanitarian end. So Russia could certainly, absolutely make that case. We could argue whether it has any standing in international law. Well, it has about as much standing as the decision to bomb Yugoslavia, the decision to invade Iraq. I mean, what kind of standing do they have in international law? So, but yeah, I mean, it's a good point. It's an interesting point. So anyway, thank you so much, Aristotle. And let me Go back. Um, um, so then we have Robert says, thank you very much, Robert, as always. Hope things are, the weather's a little better in New Jersey. Robert says, McGregor says there can be little doubt that the CIA MI6 put the Ukrainians up to provided data for the drone swarm against Putin's helicopter flight over Kursk. I mean, there's no other conclusion, to be honest. I mean, you have to think that, because for the most obvious reason, Ukraine cannot target um, with any sort of accuracy without the use of satellite technology. You have to target and you have to guide the drones. It's not just the targeting. Particularly, it's a moving target. It's a helicopter or a plane or whatever. It's a moving target. So it's a difficult thing to target that, but you have to guide it, which means that you have to guide the drone to avoid the anti-missile defense systems. You have, the anti-aircraft systems. You have to, avoid all of that in order to get the drone to hit the target. So that can only be provided by, those who possess that very sophisticated satellite technology. CIA, MI6, yeah, absolutely. The French could have been involved in this. The French always seem to be involved in most things. Where I have my doubts is whether Trump was involved. As I say, I'm going by the news conference, and Trump seemed to be surprised by that question from the reporter about whether the Russians are taking this to be an assassination attempt. So he was caught, flat-footed by that. But this truth that he sent out today, which is quite menacing, and he's saying, "Hey, I'm the best thing you've got. Really terrible things could happen to your country. But I'm the one who's preventing that." That suggests he knows now very well that these intelligence agencies and the military and everyone else, yeah, they could do, and they are willing to do really bad things. The problem is that he needs to stop that. He needs to absolutely bring it to heel. I mean, he knows that how to do this on other things, but he doesn't. He's not really doing it here as yet. Now, maybe he'll get around it. There seems to be purges going on in agencies. There's purges going on in the Pentagon. There are purges going on in the National Security Council. So maybe Trump is trying to get his arms around this within his government. I think it's very significant that there are mass firings now taking place within the National Security Council and in the Pentagon. So I think that's a good sign. He doesn't have any real control over America's ostensible European allies, and that's a serious problem, because they they are the worst. They are the ones who are now trying to suck America into this war. So that I think is a problem. But yes, he really does have to deal with this the deep state issue, because this is serious stuff. Assassination attempts. You really don't want to go down that path. That is really going to end badly, and particularly for Trump. Anyway, thank you so much, Robert. And then Robert goes on with another question. Says, if even loyalists like Patel and Bongino are softening, and Trump himself is contradicting earlier stances, does this suggest that the deep state hasn't been defeated, but has instead begun to house train Trump 2.0? That may well be the case. Patel and Bongino were indeed amazingly fatuous in that interview with Maria Bartiromo. Leave aside the the Epstein case. Um, I mean, for them to say, "Oh, that assassination in, in Pennsylvania, this is just some lone assassin, some little kid, was it 22 years old, did it all by himself. He had a drone. He did drone alerts. He figured out where to position himself. Um, the Secret Service, was amazingly lackadaisical. The crowd, the crowd noticed the gunman long before the Secret Service did. They kept warning the Secret Service about this gunman, and so there was an awful lot that's very strange about that assassination. And instead of demanding a public inquiry into that assassination, which is what they should do, they go off and go to this interview and say, "Oh, well, that's fine, just some little kid having fun with some guns." Um, Absolutely, their task should have been: we are going to have a proper inquiry into what happened, and we're going to have find out. He had all these phones, and they were destroyed. He destroyed his phones. Now, why would somebody do that? Why would you go and destroy your phones? Um, you know, so for them to come along with this bland, oh well, hey, just another lone assassin. That I found that really quite shocking. But you're right. I mean, these are not good signs. Nor is it a good sign that uh, Attorney General Pam Bondi is seems to be doing very little other than showing up on Fox News. Um, so why that's particularly shocking is that was always going to be the key. If Trump was ever going to get his hands around the deep state, if Trump was ever going to address the problem of an out of control deep state, if Trump was ever going to address the problem of the lawlessness of the government, the Justice Department was where he needed to act. That means he had to deal with the FBI and the DOJ. He had to remove all the prosecutors. He had to remove, pretty much the entirety of the FBI, from top to bottom. It was not enough to get rid of Comey and McCabe. He did that early on in his first term. That didn't help him at all. Getting rid of Comey and McCabe. It's much more extensive than that. And so these are not good signs. I would say these are not good signs. Because if he doesn't get his hands around the FBI, then that's going to break his presidency. And it's the same thing that's going to happen in foreign policy. If he doesn't get his hands around all the bad actors who are trying to drag America into this war, then he's going to be dragged into a war, and that will also bring to an end his presidency. So it's these are not at all good signs, and particularly Kash Patel and Bongino, who were the most belligerent sounding before they entered the administration. I mean, Kash Patel would constantly come on. He'd be on Tucker Carlson. He would come on Bannon, flogging his book, Government Gangsters, and promising massive purges in the government. I mean, that's the whole point. Government gangsters. These are gangsters. So you're gonna remove all the gangsters. Well, what happened? So anyway, thank you so much, Robert. And then Psinook says, thank you so much, by the way, Psinook. Really appreciate your generosity. As Psinook says, It is amazing that it would take Ukrainian drone attack on Putin's helicopter for Russia to unleash a massive drone strikes in retaliation. Well, yeah. Why do they need a provocation to do this? I couldn't agree with you more. And I find that very disappointing. That whenever these things happen, Russia immediately justifies itself by saying, well, we did it in retaliation. Well, why are you retaliating? I mean, if you're making strategic attacks, you're targeting legitimate strategic threats to Russia, then you don't need any kind of a provocation. You don't need to retaliate. You need to be absolutely hitting those vital strategic targets. And this has happened before. When Russia comes under attack, there's a terrible, this Russia's brutal, killing, and then Russia explains, well, we did this in retaliation for. They did that before over the Crimean Bridge in particular. Well, we do because they had, the Ukrainians attacked the Kerch Bridge. So this was a retaliation. Well, why do you need to retaliate? I mean, if these are strategic targets, then you attack strategic targets because you need to attack strategic targets. And in fact, Russia hasn't done this. I mean, Ukraine seems to have developed its own quite extensive uh, drone factory infrastructure. They're producing their own drones. How the hell did they do that? I mean, how does Russia just been able to? They've been able to develop these drone factories and evade Russian targets, Russian targeting. Anyway, yeah, absolutely agree with you. Why do they need a provocation to do this? No, they shouldn't. If this is a legitimate, strategic, and important target, then it should be hit, not and no retaliation. Anyway, it goes on. And as I said last week, how does Zelensky? Yes, you asked that question. I try to answer. As I said last week, how does Zelensky get to travel so freely? I know Putin made a promise to Bennett, but that seems like a weak reason by Putin. Yeah, I think it's a very weak reason. I'm only just um, retailing what the Russian explanation is. I think it's a very feeble explanation, but that's their explanation. Well, he gave his word. What the hell does it matter what you said to Bennett? Well, he's not even prime minister anymore. Um, and Bennett's an awful person. Bennett's even more of a fanatic than Netanyahu, incidentally. I mean, that's kind of forgotten that he's actually more of a fanatic on the Palestinian question than Netanyahu. But anyway, that's a separate issue. It says, I know he made a promise to Bennett, but that seems like a weak reason by Putin. Bennett this weekend sounded like a lunatic. Yeah, he always does. When interviewed by the BBC, denying all evidence showing the genocide and starvation in Gaza, that nutcase called it fake news. Yeah, he does that. So as I say, I mean, Netanyahu, awful person that he undoubtedly is, he's actually quite moderate in comparison with nutcases like Naftali Bennett, and then let alone Ben Gavir and Smotrich. Um, but you're absolutely right. I mean, and it needs to be emphasized what you just said. No commitment should ever have been made to keep Zelensky alive, particularly as killing Zelensky may well actually help to bring the war to an end. It could bring about trigger a political crisis in Ukraine and help to bring to an end. Not necessarily, but it's a possibility. And Russia hasn't done any assassinations. Russia hasn't committed any terrorist acts. Ukraine has. Ukraine has committed terrorist acts. Ukraine has assassinated Russians. How is Daria Dugina in any way a legitimate uh, target? I mean that that's a civilian as a civilian can be. Where even if her target was her father, he's a civilian. He's a thinker. He's a philosopher. That's a civilian, and is not, and therefore not a legitimate target. But the Ukrainians are happy to do this. No one in the West ever calls Ukraine out on this. But Russia just for some reason doesn't do it. And as I say, Ukraine has developed its own military infrastructure. It's by no means um, wholly reliant on importing weapons from Europe and the United States. And the drones, it's producing its own drones, and the drones are really now becoming the key factor in this war. So how the hell did they manage to build these drone factories? I mean, I don't know. Anyway, thank you so much, Sinok. Really appreciate it. And then Robert says, while it's tempting to float the Oedipal hypothesis, Ari, Macron, and Brigitte, doesn't the big Mike angle of the story throw a wrench in that theory? I'm trying to think what you mean by Big Mike. You mean whether that's you mean that whether she may well be a man rather than a woman. I don't know. I mean that's a good point. I mean I have to say that I'm a little bit of a skeptic on the question of that Brigitte is really a man. I don't know. I go by whenever you see these athletes and but the women athletes, so-called women, or the transgender, although or even if they're not actually guys wearing women's clothes, but let's say whether they've taken testosterone or whether they've uh, they've had born in a kind of intersex or whatever, they usually are more masculine than she is. If you listen to her speaking, she really doesn't have a male voice, and I think that that's always the key. Whenever you're wondering, well, is this a boy or a girl? I mean, just listen to them speak, and then if you listen to them speak and say, okay, well, that whether that's a boy, whether this is somebody taking hormones or whatever, you can say, well, that's quite a sort of a deep voice. Um, she doesn't have that, and that's why I may be wrong. I'm a little skeptical of the story that she's all along she's been a man. Um, so I tend to go along with the Oedipal hypothesis. Having said that, there's still something very strange about that, because if you consider that, all right, he's a schoolboy, he has a relationship with his teacher. Okay, not very nice, but it happens. It's um, and but they don't really last for very long. I mean, it's one of those things that happens, occasionally, and then it comes to an end for the obvious reason that, well, there's no real future in a relationship. He's 15 and she's 40. I mean, that's where do you go? Um, but but the relationship lasted, which makes it all very peculiar. Let's say that was the nature of it is quite peculiar. And she seems to have been his complete enabler. I mean, it's all these years somehow he became this phenomenally successful person. I mean, he got to be very rich, got a job with Rothschild. He got to be president of France. Somebody helped him to achieve that. So she's she, she achieved that. Um, so the fact that they continued all these years, you know, to me, it lends an even greater peculiarity to the whole story. If they'd broken up years ago, then you say, okay, well, that's pretty, nothing unusual. Schoolboy, um, has a thing with his teacher. Teacher has a thing with with a cute schoolboy. Okay, it happens. Um, but that's the unusual part. That all these years they've remained together. Um, yeah. But as I say, I'm skeptical unless I have to see more evidence. I'm skeptical of the thesis that she's a male. So that I didn't find Candace Owens's hypothesis particularly convincing. Anyway, thank you, Robert. And then here is Marty. Always very good to see you, Marty. Thank you so much for all of your contributions. Thank you. I haven't had a chance yet to respond, but I will to the postings that you did on the latest contribution of the Gagglers Music Club, which was, of course, Shostakovich's Leningrad Symphony, and you posted a lot of very interesting items about it, and I intend to respond to your posting. So please, look at listen to the Shostakovich's Symphony. You don't have to like it; it's not for everyone, but also enjoy Marty's postings. Those are really interesting. Um, and then Marty posts Annalena Baerbock, the picture of Annalena Baerbock and Hillary Clinton, both wearing almost identical costumes, red. Wow, that's a that's as gruesome a sight as I've seen in a long time. So wow, climate emergency, red, not green. Yeah, that's interesting. It's an identical outfits, huh? Identical colors. It's not just that they're red; they look like an identical shade of red. Huh. That's interesting. Um, anyway, and um, um, and then we have um, Ergos asks Marty reasonably, but which I wouldn't have asked. Did you really have to impose that ugly sight on us? And then, yeah, okay. And then Carlos says the King of England was in Ottawa today for some reason. Well, the reason was that they wanted to show Trump, hey, Canada, it's still part of the Commonwealth. I am the king. The king is still the head of state of Canada. You, Donald Trump, are not going to take away something that is still crown land, a land still ruled by the crown. So this. I mean, this hasn't happened, I think, since 1957. With his mother, she was still very young then. That the Parliament was opened by the King of England. So that'll show Trump. Um, but Trump is such an Anglophile. He probably didn't really have too many problems with it. I think he likes Charles, even if Charles doesn't really like him. Anyway, and we have a question from Stone River. He says, "Do you think a Trumpian figure could emerge in Europe?" I would say that probably not. I'm in a kind of pessimistic frame of mind. I think that the um, the political media um, institutional establishment in Europe is so powerful that they would stop any kind of a Trumpian figure in his tracks. I had different views maybe just a few months ago, but given what's now happened in Romania, and then today Georgescu announced that he's retiring from politics. So that's it. He's not going to attempt to run for office again. So he's gone. I mean, Le Pen. I mean, as things stand, Le Pen cannot run in 2027. The AFD are marginalized, however popular. They can't even get a single committee chairmanship in the Bundestag. Um, Nigel Farage, I think he can be co-opted very easily. He of all of them, I think, is the easiest to manipulate. I think he can be co-opted. I think I don't think he'd put up too much of a resistance. And in Britain, it's particularly difficult to make any kind of a breakthrough with their first past the post system. That means, in just about every constituency, you would need to win 30 to 40% of the vote, which is a huge undertaking for a new party. And then all the rest, the various guys in Portugal or in Holland or wherever, they can be easily browbeaten, and they're not, I don't think any of them can has the strength and the will to plow on against all the various institutional forces arrayed against them. Trump is a unique figure. I think there's just nobody like him. There's nobody like him in the United States, um, let alone in Europe. And what I think is particularly significant in the United States, and this is what the pollsters say, and I'm talking about Rasmussen, so we're not talking about the YouGov and all the rest. They say Trump's popularity doesn't translate into popularity for any other so-called populist figure. J.D. Vance doesn't enjoy anything like the support that Trump has. So J.D. Vance would have real problems running in 2028. I mean, he may well win and so on, but nonetheless, it just shows that it's Trump. The support for Trump is unique to Trump. And so, given generally, and even Trump has had problems, given all the problems faced by the populists, then if you don't have a Trumpian figure who can just simply shrug off the media and the way Trump does, then it's awfully hard to pull it off. It's just it's just very hard to do. I mean, it's like you watch him and it says the way he talks to journalists. Oh, you're fake news. And then just say, "Oh, be quiet." Just you're fake news. I'm not. I mean that requires a real talent. He kind of invented this. So, anyway, I hope I'm wrong, but I at the moment I don't really see it. And then Robert says, "Do you agree with the IFFHS assessment that Lev Yashin, the greatest goalkeeper in history?" Seems hard to argue with. I do agree with that, and interestingly enough. Yashin has been regarded as the greatest goalkeeper of all time for decades. So all the years that have gone by, and no one has really challenged Yashin. I mean, the Britain had a few good goalkeepers like Gordon Banks and Peter Shilton, who were pretty good, but they didn't have Yashin stature. I have to say, I remember Yashin. I did see Yashin, and he looked just like you actually expect Russians to look. The way Russians look. He looked very tough, kind of very good looking, blonde, but really tough, no nonsense. Hey, he's the guy. He's patriotic. He doesn't take any nonsense from anybody, and he was really good at what he did. So even back then, in the 1966 World Cup, the famous 1966 World Cup that England won, Yashin was one of the stars of the World Cup because you couldn't get anything past him, and the USSR played Hungary. There's a lot of excitement among the Hungarians, that maybe Hungary will once again revive the glory days of the team of the early 1950s, and they played the USSR in the quarterfinal, and the USSR defeated Hungary. Yashin played a major role in that. So anyway, I have to depart. Unfortunately, I have to do an interview. So thank you everybody who joined me. Thank you so much for all of your really interesting questions and contributions and ideas, suggestions, everything. Really appreciate it. And above all, really thank you so much everybody who contributed to the tip jar that allows us to do what we do here, the journalism, the thoughtful analysis and commentary that we try to do here. So thank you so much everybody. Richard, thank you for your very kind words. I really appreciate that, Richard Phillips. So we will be back on Thursday at the same time. Look forward to seeing you all then. Until then, good night. See you Thursday.